Today, I'll be continuing with my college football game by game prediction and roster discussion videos. Today, I'll be doing the Penn State Nittany Lions. Penn State returns at 63% of their production, which is quite a bit. And James Franklin had the 13th ranked recruiting class in the country in 2025, and that is good, but not great. He didn't have any five-star recruits in this recruiting class. So starting on the offensive side of the roster at quarterback, Drew Aller, known on my channel as Disaster Aller, threw for 3,327 yards in 16 games last season, and he now has 29 college starts, and he completed 66.5% of his passes, which was good, and he had an 8.4 yards per throw average, which is good. And those numbers were all better than last year's in 2023. And he was a solid quarterback last year, but his number of interceptions went up last year compared to 2023. In 2023, he only threw two interceptions, and in 2024, he threw eight interceptions, and he did throw 24 touchdown passes. He's not a great runner at all, but he's not a statue either. But the problem with Disaster Aller is he always plays bad in Penn State's biggest moments. I'll go ahead and say if a Disaster Aller doesn't have any improvement this year, Penn State is not winning the national championship. And Penn State's wide receiver room, though, it should be the best it's been in a long time. They've completely redone it in the transfer portal, bringing in three good wide receivers. They bring in Trevor Pena from Syracuse, who had last season 84 catches for 941 and nine touchdowns. Averaging 11.2 a catch. And they bring in Kyron Hudson from USC, who had last year in 12 games, 38 catches for 462 and three touchdowns, averaging 12.2 a catch. And they bring in from Troy Devontae Ross, who had last year 76 catches for 1,043 yards and 11 touchdowns, averaging 13.7 yards per catch. But there is no replacement for Tyler Warren at tight end. And at running back, though, Penn State couldn't be much better. They returned two of the best running backs in the country, Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. So Singleton and Allen have been Penn State's top two running backs for the past three seasons. They could both be playing in the NFL this coming season, but decided to come back for their senior years, surprisingly. Singleton in 41 college games has 2,912 yards rushing and 32 touchdowns and averages 5.8 yards per carry. And Allen in 42 games has 2,877 yards rushing and 24 touchdowns, and averaging 5.1 yards per carry. It wouldn't surprise me if Penn State averages over 200 rushing yards per game this season. And their offensive line does lose probably their best player from last season, Sal Wormley. But good news for Penn State, he's the only starter that they lose. And Penn State has had one of the best offensive lines in the country the last 3 years, and I'm pretty sure this is going to make it 4 years in a row that they have that. So they return at left guard, I Vega, Ione, or whatever his name is, who only allowed one pressure and no sacks all season last year. And then at center, they have Nick Dawkins coming back, who did allow 29 quarterback pressures, but only allowed two sacks. And at right tackle, they have Nolan Rushi, who's a five-star who played in all 16 games last year. And he didn't become a starter, though, until the last 5 games of the season. But four of those were either the Big Ten championship game or playoff games. And he did struggle as a rotational player last year, but when he became a starter, he did really well. And all of last year, he allowed 22 quarterback pressures and only one sack. And they've got Drew Shelton coming back at left tackle, who only allowed two sacks last season. And then their starting right guard will be Cooper Cousins. That spot of the offensive line will have the least experience because while Cousins did play in all 16 games last year, and he is a four-star recruit. He was only a rotational player. He didn't make any starts, and he only played 171 snaps. And I do think, though, Penn State's offense should be pretty good this year. They returned their offensive coordinator up for a second season, Andy Nicky, who I think is a pretty good offensive mind. And their defense will again be one of the best in the country. So on the defensive line, Abdul Carter is too good of a player for them to be able to replace, but they do return two really good players on their defensive line. Danai Dennis Sutton, who had 42 tackles and 45 total pressures and nine sacks and three pass breakups and two forced fumbles and a fumble recovery and an interception last season. And Zane Durant, who had last year 42 tackles and three sacks and 28 total pressures and a pass breakup last season. And then at linebacker, Penn State does lose Colby King, who was their best linebacker, but they get back Tony Rojas, who had last year 58 tackles and four pass breakups and three interceptions and one for a touchdown and a sack and six total pressures. And they bring in a four-star linebacker from North Carolina, Amari Campbell, who had last year 76 tackles and six and a half sacks and 22 total pressures and two pass breakups and a forced up fumble. And then in the secondary, at cornerback, they're going to be really good. They've got AJ Harris coming back, who had last year 48 tackles and five pass breakups and an interception. And they've got Zion Tracy, who was only a three-star recruit, but he played in all 16 games and made four starts, and he had 35 tackles and a sack, and two interceptions, one for a touchdown. And they've got Elliott Washington, who played in 14 games and only made one start, but he's a four-star recruit and had 26 tackles and six pass breakups and an interception. And at safety, they do lose their best one. Jalen Reed, who is off to the NFL, and he was probably their best defensive back last year, but they do return the other starting safety, Zakee Wheatley, who is really good. He had last year 95 tackles and four pass breakups and three interceptions and a sack and two fumble recoveries and a forced fumble. So now for the predictions, Penn State's first three games against Nevada, FIU, and Villanova will all be big blowout wins. 40 plus points most likely. Penn State's at second string should get to play the whole second half of all three of those games. And now Oregon, I think this is going to be a really close game. That's going to be a four-quarter game. And Penn State was able to run really well on Oregon last year. Allen had 124 yards, Singleton had 105 yards, and even Disaster Aller had 54 yards rushing. And Oregon's defensive line is probably going to take a step back this year. So I think Penn State will be able to run well on Oregon again. But I do think Oregon will be able to run pretty well on Penn State. They were able to run pretty well on them last year. And Oregon's offensive line, well, I don't think it'll be quite as good as it was last year. I do think that it will be very good. And Oregon has got two good running backs, and they won't have Abdul Carter to go against this time. And Disaster Aller is a much more experienced quarterback than Oregon's Dante Moore is. And Disaster Aller did play his best game for in a big game against Oregon last year, throwing for 226 and three touchdowns. But he was not accurate in that game, only completing 20 of 39 passes, and he did throw two very costly interceptions. And Oregon's quarterback Dante Moore won't have Abdul Carter coming after him like Dylan Gabriel did. It really comes down to coaching in this game for me, and I think Dan Lanning will outcoach James Franklin. So I'm going with Oregon to get this win. And now on the road at UCLA. So the score to this one last year was 27-11. And I think Penn State should be able to win by at least as much as they did against them last season. With Nico, I did leave you at quarterback for UCLA. They might be able to score a little bit more than they did against Penn State last year, but I still don't think they'll score very much. And I think Penn State will be able to score more than they did last year against UCLA because of their upgraded wide receiver room. So I'm going with Penn State. And Northwestern, this should be like a four touchdown win for Penn State because Penn State and Northwestern have such a talent difference that Penn State's players sitting on the bench this year would be starters at Northwestern. And this game should be over with by the beginning of the fourth quarter. And now on the road at Iowa. I don't think Iowa will be able to do much offensively against Penn State. And Penn State, I think, will be able to score quite a bit in this game because Iowa does lose a lot on their defense. I think this will be like a 30-7 type of blowout win for Penn State. And now on the road at Ohio State. Penn State offense, I think, might be able to do a little more than they have been able to the last 2 years against Ohio State, because Ohio State's run defense, I think, will take a pretty big step back. So I think Penn State will be able to run some on them this time, and their pass rush. Ohio State's will, I think, take a big step back. But Disaster Allard has played terrible both times against Ohio State. He threw a very costly interception, I remember, against them last year to Igbinosun, who is still with Ohio State. And Ohio State's quarterback will have a better wide receiver room than Disaster Allard will. And Ohio State quarterback will also have an offensive line that has five players with starting experience, and they all played really well in their starting experience. And Penn State's pass rush, just losing Abdul Carter, I think will cause it to take a pretty big step back. And I don't trust James Franklin and Disaster Aller in a game like this. Those two alone are enough for me to pick against Penn State in this game. I'm going with Ohio State to get this win by about a field goal. And now Indiana. So while Kirk Cignetti might be as good or even better of a game time coach as James Franklin is, James Franklin, while I wouldn't consider him to be an elite recruiter, he is a very good recruiter, and getting talent is a big part of being a good football coach. And even after the really good year, Indiana's recruiting has still been very bad. Now, this game might be pretty close, because Indiana still did well in the portal and they got a good transfer portal quarterback. But James Franklin is a better at developing strong lines of scrimmage than Cignetti is, I think. So I'm going with Penn State to get this win. And now up Michigan at State. So I think Penn State will dominate the line of scrimmage on both sides in this game. And Penn State's defense probably won't shut out Michigan State, but I don't think Michigan State will do much in this game. And I think Singleton and Allen will run all over Michigan State, and Penn State will put up quite a bit of points. And I think they'll win this one by around three touchdowns. And now Nebraska. This one could be a pretty close game because Nebraska's offensive line, I think, is going to be good enough to where they might be able to somewhat handle Penn State's front seven. And Nebraska, I think, is going to have a good secondary, so they may be able to slow down Penn State's passing attack some. But I do think Nebraska's defensive line is going to take a step back this year, and I don't think they'll be able to handle Penn State's offensive line. And Penn State has better running backs than Nebraska does, so I'm going to go with Penn State to get this win. And now on the road at Rutgers. Penn State is better, I think, on both sides of the ball than Rutgers is, and they're a better coach team. I'm going to go with Penn State to get the win by about three touchdowns in this one. So my prediction for Penn State this year is 10-2 overall and 7-2 in the conference. So this will for sure get them back to the college football playoff. So that will be it with this video. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.